Good evening, everyone. We're going to start shortly. If you could take your seats.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rabbi Yanni Balmaz, one of the rabbis here at the Shaarey Zedek, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our home. And it is a great honor for us to especially welcome Angela Orosz-Richt. And it will be a great experience to listen to her story. And there is something that I wanted to share with you, because recently, when we had in January, the International Remembrance for the Holocaust, somebody asked me, how come we have two? One is Yom HaShoah, and then we have this one. Why do we need two different remembrances during the year? And my answer, what I said to this person, is, I wish we could have something to remember the Holocaust every single day of our lives. I think we should remember all the time. And this is an amazing experience, an amazing opportunity to remember the atrocities of the Shoah once again. All we have to do is to look at the news to realize how important it is to have events like this. So I would like to applaud the initiative of the Federation to bring Angela here to Winnipeg. And again, for Shaarey Zedek, it's a great honor to partner with them to be able to provide this amazing experience to you. Thank you all for coming.
Good evening. My name is Carrie Shankrow, and I am the chair of the Jewish Federation of Winnipeg's March of the Living Committee and a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. On behalf of the Federation, the representative body of Winnipeg's Jewish community, I would like to welcome everyone to tonight's event. Angela Orosz-Richt was born in December 1944 in Auschwitz, the largest and most infamous of Nazi extermination camps. Her mother, Vera Bein, was 3 months pregnant when she arrived in Auschwitz. In January of 1945, Angie and Vera were liberated by the Soviet Army, and the horrors of what transpired in Auschwitz were exposed to the world. I met Angie when I went on March of the Living as a chaperone in 2018. We were at the Jewish cemetery in Warsaw, and around her were all the student participants taking in her every word. I wondered, how could this woman hold the attention of our teenagers this way? I knew in that moment that Angie was a true gift. Her inner strength has guided her through a life of challenges and has led her to dedicate herself to educating people around the world about the horrors of the Holocaust. Over the last few years, Angie has become an outspoken and passionate advocate for human rights, touching thousands of young adults worldwide. When Angie speaks, she implores the younger generation not to forget the Holocaust. 75 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, other concentration camps, and the end of the Holocaust, we remember the 6 million men, women, and children who were brutally murdered by Hitler and his collaborators. The tragedy of the Holocaust is forever etched into our memory. We remember the lives that were lost, dreams shattered, and families torn apart. This is why it is our duty to remember the Holocaust, the most catastrophic and preventable tragedy of world history. As Elie Wiesel told us all, let us remember what hurts the victim most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander. We must commit ourselves to continue the telling of stories like Angie's to our children and the generations that follow and say never again. Angie, I can't believe 2 years has passed and you are getting ready to embark on yet another journey, continuing your quest to educate our children on March of the Living 2020. Your story is one that everyone should remember. We tell the participants, once you hear a witness, you become a witness. Angie, I am honored to call you my friend, and our coast-to-coast March of the Living participants are very lucky to go on this incredible journey with you. Thank you for all Thank you all for being here tonight to continue this commitment of remembrance and for helping us welcome Angie to Winnipeg. Following Angie's story, there will be a 10-minute open mic for anyone who may have questions for Angie. Now, without further ado, please help me welcome Angie.
It was such a long introduction. She told the whole story, but Roberta only gave me 45 minutes to put in 75 years, so that's why she helped me out. Let me start with the present. Exactly a month ago, I was in Auschwitz with 200 survivors. That was the day of Auschwitz liberation, and from all over the world, we were 200 survivors there. I cannot tell you the feeling. We didn't want to go to sleep. We just wanted to be together. We just wanted to talk because we knew this is the last one. I was the youngest one with 75 years. So they were on 94, they were 96, and they were in wheelchair, they were with walkers, but they were there to show the world, the Holocaust survivors will tell the story, and that's the important thing is, to tell the story. We're very worried, survivors, what will happen after we are not here? Who will remember? Who will tell the stories? So they're working on it, to make it memorable and films and everything, but we're very, very worried. So let me back up. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. Winnipeg is great. Thank you, Winnipeg. I love that city. I might move here. It's an honor and a privilege to tell my mother's story. My name is Angela Orosz-Richt, but this is Vera's story, my mother's story, what she did, how she survived, and how she gave life to me. I am putting always an effort. It's Vera's story. I am just a product. When my mother gave birth to me in Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1944, December 21st. I am the youngest survivor before the liberation. At the day of the liberation, a Hungarian boy was born. We're still in contact with him. And Hungary is still not Winnipeg or Canada, and it's still not so be proud to be a Jew. It's lots of problems from the government, and anti-Semitism is very high. He doesn't want to know about Hungary, about the world, his story, but I do tell his story. My mother always said, I have two birthdays. One birthday was in December 21st when I was born, but the real one was January 27 when Auschwitz was liberated. If Auschwitz wouldn't be liberated on January 27, she said she doesn't think we would be able to survive. It's important, to teach the Holocaust. The Holocaust education has to be priority. We all, and I am sure you're just as upset as I am when we see recent anti-Semitism everywhere, from Europe and here and United States, and it's mind-boggling. It came again to the surface. I believe is the education will be the key, and to start the education in very, very early age. Why do I tell the story? It's part of Holocaust education. So we believe if just only one kid goes home and says at home, oh, I saw a survivor, she was there. Yes, the Holocaust happened, we won. So I work at the Holocaust Museum in Montreal as a volunteer, and we have kids coming there, and we're going to tell the story. I am telling her story, my mother's story, because I want to make sure she won't be forgotten, that her fight to save my life is not forgotten, and all her determination, her love, her persistence, her positiveness, that will teach children to never give up, fight. Her strength, despite her starvation, fear of death was unspeakable. She remained in her mental health, and she never, ever gave up. I was born in December 1944. I'm sorry, Roberta, but I am dying of heat. Thank you. You saw, yeah, the March of the Livings. We very proudly wear it, but it's too hot here. My mother was born in 1919 in Budapest. She came from a very educated family. Her father was an architect in Budapest, and her mother spoke many languages, was an art lover, a classical music enthusiast. Their children were raised by French-speaking nannies and attended the best schools. Beside my mother, she had 2 siblings. When my mother finished her high school in Budapest, the law did not permit Jewish students to go to university. Vera applied for a job as a nanny and moved to a little Hungarian town. The name was Shaarey, eastern Hungary. Shaarey was a little town with many famous historical figures, like Comenius, who taught there. He is considered the father of the modern education. In 1943, it was a cultural center. My mother met my father, Dr. Bein Tibor. He was a lawyer, and they married in 1943. Just like any young couple, they spent their life in happiness, they had friends, they played cards, and they didn't see the clouds are coming. Everything changed on March 19 in 1944. Germany invaded Hungary, and Hungary gladly had them. The morning after Passover, in April in that year, there was a banging on the door. It was the gendarmes, the local Hungarian militia, who were worse than the police, said my mother. My parents were forced from their home in Shaarey and herded in a cattle car, and they were taken to Sátoraljaújhely. That's where the ghetto was. Because it was, you know, the ghetto, I always ask the children where maybe they won't know. The ghetto was the first step when the Jews were separated from non-Jews. And because it was day after Passover, they did not even have bread to take with them. So the kids, I always explain why it's so important. Why do I put an effort? There was no bread. Because when you have bread, you make a sandwich and you have a meal. So they didn't even have that. Until May 22, they were in the ghetto in Sátoraljaújhely, and they spent their last days together in that crowded ghetto. Then they were forced again into a cattle car, and on the trip that lasted 3 days. On May 25th, they arrived in Auschwitz-Birkenau. I was in my mother's belly. She was 3 months pregnant. She and my father and others were beaten and herded by the SS men, whips and machine guns, amid shouting, "Schnell, schnell, leave your bags on the train, we will take it to your place." There were SS men on the platform, standing in watchtowers with machine guns and spotlights, watching the terrible chaos. From up there, as Grönig, the Nazi, when it was the Nazi trial, the Nazi guard said, everything was ordinary. Everything was ordinary. That's how he saw it. But for Dawn, my mother was never the fear of the barking dogs, the fear of the German shepherd was all her life, she was frightened from it. But from up there, it was ordinary. Everyone who came to Auschwitz stood in this line until in split at the infamous Dr. Mengele. To the left were sent women who showed sign of pregnancy, children under 15, the elderly and the frail. These were the ones to be murdered that day. They were told, hang up your clothes, remember where you put your clothes, and you take a shower. And they believed it. These Jews were not showered. They were gassed. And after they cremated them, and their ashes were all over in the camp, and then thrown as a fertilizer, and thrown in the pond. And when you still walk there, you feel that. Your skin is still itchy after 75 years, and you just feel there that the ashes. My mother once sent to the right, which meant temporary reprieve from death. When it was her turn, in front of Mengele, my mother told him she was pregnant, hoping he would be compassionate and would let her stay with her friend. She had already been separated from my father and would never see him again. Mengele snapped, "You stupid goose," ordering her to the right. That was a total miracle, because in front of her, he pinched the woman's breast. If any liquid came out, then it meant the woman was pregnant and right away was sent to the gas chamber. And he waved her to the working group. We call it, that was the first miracle. I can speak about miracles here. You will understand, because I'm so scared when I'm talking about miracles, they will think something wrong with me. But here I can speak about miracles. She was good stock, healthy and strong enough for forced labor. The same had happened to my father, but he did not survive the inhuman condition, and he died of exhaustion. No. He didn't die. Let me say differently. He was murdered by exhaustion. In the interview with her granddaughter for a school project, my mother once described what happened next. I am going to read her words. After arrival in the labor camp, I was tattooed. From that moment on, I wasn't Vera. I was A6075, totally shaven, given a uniform and a wooden clogs, the shaved heads, the tattoos. These were symbols of our dehumanization. All our dignity was taken from us. We no longer counted as human beings. We were reduced for a number. My mother was assigned to work the night shift in the warehouse in Camp A. It contained the personal belongings of the victims. There, my mother's job was to pick out anything of value that Jewish victims had brought with them. Sometimes in the skirt, end of the skirt, there was a jewelry, or in the pocket was a piece of bread, or some money, what was there. But the SS was behind them, and they watched them. If the finest clothing was disinfected, and they distributed to the German population. When she was 5 months pregnant, my mother was transferred to Barrack 2, where she was assigned an Außenkommando that worked outside the camp. There she did heavy physical labor, building roads and working in the fields. She later told me, if we found plants in the fields, animal food, not even meant for human consumption, there was a celebration among us. It was as we thought we found a treasure, like a Sachertorte. We shared it, we ate it. They ate animal food and celebrated. Later, my mother was assigned to kitchen duty. There she managed to scrunch some potato peels, the only reason I was able to remain alive in her belly, as she said, because of the vital vitamins in the potato peels. The rest of her daily diet consisted ersatz coffee in the morning, made from water and burned wheat, that was given morning and night. We later found out that it was spiked with a chemical called bromidine, so the women wouldn't have their periods and kept inmates tranquilized. Sometimes warm soup made from grass or poison ivy, that was very often, and a very small slice of black bread. Once my mother found a bone in her soup. She was so happy. A small bone, but the SS saw her happiness and kicked her below in the knee, and she spent all her life with a limp and a blackened right leg because of that bone she found in her soup. In Birkenau, the prisoner's bunk was pieces of dirty straw or planks 3 tiers high, 6 people in one. If one had to turn, all had to turn because they were like sardines in a can. The bottom plank was the most comfortable. The middle bunk had no air, and the top was hit by blowing wind, rain, and snow. At one point, when my mother could no longer do the very hard physical work because of her pregnancy, she went to the Blockelteste and told her, "I'm pregnant." Under the rules of Auschwitz, his confession meant she would be sent to the gas chamber immediately. Miracle 2. Instead, she was sent to Barrack C. There she took care of the children, especially the twins, who were used for medical experiments by Mengele and his fellow colleagues who called themselves doctors. Later, my mother became a human guinea pig for Mengele's team. In October, when she was 7 months pregnant, Professor Karl Klauberg team selected her for sterilization experiments. They injected a burning substance into her cervix. Right behind, in the uterus, was the fetus me. These injections were repeated, and when the doctor put it on the right side, the fetus moved the opposite side. And it was very painful, as my mother said. And the next day, another injection, and the other side, and I moved as the fetus the opposite side. So he played a little while that, and miracles, I am here, and this injection didn't kill me. Those experiments are the reasons I do not have any brothers or sisters. I have to put later my mother remarried, so that's why I can say that I didn't have any brothers or sisters. Somehow I survived. After they finished observing the effects of the injecting caustic chemicals into my mother's cervix, my mother went back to her barrack and luckily was forgotten about by the angel of death. Because she was fed so little, I was so tiny that the pregnancy didn't show. If it not that, we would have both been killed before I even taken my first breath. When my mother was 8 months pregnant, a Hungarian woman doctor It's not good? Can you hear me? Okay. Well, when my mother was 8 months pregnant, a Hungarian woman doctor, possible Gisela Pearl, who worked under Mengele and knew about my mother's pregnancy, looks like, came to the barrack and one night and offered my mother an abortion. She told her, "When you give birth, we don't know how Mengele will react. If he's in a good mood, only your child will die. But if Mengele is in a bad mood, both of you are going to the gas chamber. You are so young. You could save your life. My mother promised she would think about it and give her an answer next day. That night, in her dream, she saw her mother begging her, Verushka, the fetus is a child already, almost ready to come out. Trust in Hashem, trust in God, and you will be helped. Don't have the abortion. The next day, she gave the doctor her answer, a definite no. At that time, there was another woman who had given birth, and Mengele bound her breast, wanting to see how long the baby would live without being fed. Shortly after, both the mother and the baby were murdered. My mother was not sure of the date when I was born. All she knew is it was 3 days before the SS celebrated Christmas. If they celebrated on 24, then I was born 21. If they celebrated 25, I was born on 22. It's not important. On the day I was born, my mother told the Blockenteste, who was a prisoner from Czechoslovakia, that she was in labor. Since her father had been a doctor, the Blockenteste knew a little bit about what to do. Somehow she managed to get a sheet, some hot water, and scissors. She told my mother to go up to the top bunk. She went up, and my mother and helped her give birth. This is how I came into this world, in a barrack filled with children. None of them knew I had been born. I was so malnourished that I weighed 1 kilo and I was unable to cry. That was the reason we survived. 3 hours after giving birth, my mother had to leave me alone in the bunk and go outside for roll call called Appel. To this day, I am amazed that my mother was able to do this. What courage! What incredible strength to be able to do that. It was December, it was freezing cold, and she only had rugs for clothing. My mother had to stand uphill for a long time, freezing temperature. The wooden shoes the inmates wore, they were dangerous because of the snow and the ice. If she fell, they would shot her. She was shivering, no proper clothing, no proper shoes, but one thing was burning inside her. I have a daughter. I have to save her. Aside from the heightening anxiety of leaving a very small baby alone in a freezing empty barrack, there was an additional dread playing in her mind. Rats. The barrack swarmed with various sorts of vermin, including rats that bit the living and fed the dead. Vera was terrified the hungry rat might take a bite out of me or just eat me up. She was afraid, what is she going to find when she comes back to the barrack? This made the length of standing out the roll call even more interminable, her entire being vibrating with silent panic. The whole time she was praying that I would still be alive when she returned to the barrack. Imagine the stress. One day, not long after, a few days before liberation, my mother heard people yelling, "Schnell, schnell!" The German guards herded the surviving inmates like my mother into a tunnel beneath the camp and told them they're going to be blown up inside. This did not happen, but to her last days, my mother retained a mortal fear of tunnels. In Toronto, many decades later, she had a panic attack because the subway train she was riding got stuck in a tunnel for 10 minutes. On January 27, Auschwitz was liberated. The day another child was born, his name was György Faludi. Girl's mother did not have enough milk to nurse her son, so my mother fed both of us. That was the beginning of a long friendship between these two mothers and between us, continuing on Facebook today. In this madness, many miracles happened. My mother was starving and yet she had milk to nurse me and Yuri, and after liberation, even another child. From the food they gave her, she had maybe 300, 400 calories a day. How did she have milk? A miracle. I say in other places, but I am not here to talk about miracles, but here I can talk about miracles. I am very happy. And you will understand the miracles. In this madness, after end of November, my mother was able to return to Hungary with me in end of November. Through Katowice and another Polish cities with a long stay in a Russian DP camp of Slutsk, my mother finally returned to Budapest to look for a doctor who could help us. I was a very, very sick baby. Her own mother, my grandmother, when she saw me, she was begging my mother, Verushka, let her die. This baby will never be healthy, never be a baby. Please, let her, you're young, you can have other. My mother said, oh no, I had her in Auschwitz and I am going to raise my daughter. I will do anything possible. When that was end of November, I was almost 1 year old and 3 kilos. Any babies, normal babies, are born with 3 kilos. My mother was the only convinced that I would live. People used to call her the crazy woman. They thought she had lost her mind in Auschwitz, and that was a doll because I couldn't move when she went with the carriage on the street. I did not look like a human baby. I looked like a raggedy doll. But my mother was determined to save my life. One doctor said to her, I am going to try. I am going to hold this baby upside down like a chicken, and if she lifts up her head, I can try something. And it looks like I listened to him and I lift up my head. And then he took care of me for a very, very long time. The biggest problem was the bones because they were soft, so they couldn't let me walk because otherwise everything will turn into just like an O. For a while, we stayed in my grandmother's house in Budapest. But my mother, when she found a doctor, and he tried a very interesting thing. He took blood from my mother, and then he gave it to me. It was a very new experience those days. So then she decided she's going down to Shaarey because if her husband will come back, that's the place where he is going to look for her. There was witnesses, and they told her he was murdered. Later, when she realized he was murdered, she married my stepfather, who had lost his daughter and his wife in Auschwitz. My stepfather adopted me. I was 12 years old when I found out he is not my father. Those days, you know, the stigma of stepmother, Snow White business, was very, very strong. He didn't want me to feel that, so he didn't want to tell. Today, they would say I had learning disability. In 1972, Dr. Jean Joffen presented the 5th World Congress of Jewish Studies a paper titled Long-Range Effects of Medical Experiments in Concentration Camps. The effect of the administration of estrogen to the mother on the intelligence of the offspring. Joffen reported that after testing hundreds of children of Holocaust survivors, the Auschwitz contingent had the lowest IQ rate. Dr. Joffen said because the synthetic hormone were experiments, they were responsible. I grew up seeing a beautiful marriage. They loved each other. They had 28 years age difference between them. They loved each other, they appreciated being alive, focused all their efforts on rebuilding their shattered lives, trying to push to back of their minds the horrors what they experienced. My mother loved me with the intensity more than normal, and my stepfather too, probably because he saw in me his beloved murdered daughter. I was lucky recipient of this love and protection. The rooms in our house were decorated with pictures of relatives who had perished in Auschwitz. And when I asked, who are they? The answer was, when I was little, died. And then when I was older, murdered. They were murdered. Today, in the beginning, they didn't want to use the word murdered, of course. Today, I am a grandmother myself, a great-grandmother to a few children. I feel responsible for their future. As Roman Kent once said on the 70th Commemorial, we don't want our past to be our children's future. The Holocaust has to be taught. The Holocaust has to be remembered and learned from. Half of Canadians can't name a concentration camp. Lots of, I don't know exact statistics, but they don't know what Auschwitz was. The Israeli Fund did that research, and it was mind-boggling how much the Holocaust is not known. When somebody is dying, we wish a peaceful death for the person to leave that world peacefully. That didn't happen with my mother. When she lived, she was happy because she was able to put all these memories, like your computer hard drive, she put it at the back. But when she was on her deathbed, there was no amount of morphine would take away the thoughts, and she was yelling, Mengele is at the door. Mengele is taking me. And this is how my mother died. And we couldn't help. We couldn't tell her Mengele is not there. Spite of her smiles, the horror was always there. She was frightened, and but she was worried also about the Holocaust could happen. My mother never spoke about those horrors to anyone. An inner voice told her that nobody could understand these experiences because they just wouldn't believe it. And that was like the first 20 years, they couldn't talk about it because only those who went through could understand. There is no use talking about it. Even, she said, even I wouldn't believe it happened. It was true. As the survivor Esther Bauer said, the first 20 years we couldn't talk about it. For the next 20 years, nobody wanted to hear about it. Only the next 20 years, people started asking questions. Elie Wiesel once wrote, there is much to be done. There is much that can be done. One person of integrity can make a difference of life and death. I would like to make that difference on my small way. My own children always rolled their eyes when I told them the Holocaust could happen again. But today, more than before, I am convinced that it can happen again. Why is that? Because the world not learned the lessons of the Shoah. Some people have, but by no means all. Since 1945, we have seen more genocides. People were murdered in their thousands, hundreds of thousands in Rwanda, Srebrenica, Syria, and so many other places. And antisemitism, the oldest form of racial hatred, thousands of years old and still alive. There are still people who believe that the Jews are rich, that the Jews are influential, that the Jews run Hollywood, or the media, or Wall Street. The internet is full of garbage. It spreads like bushfires. It remains largely unchecked. But we worry when we see this old hatred against us resurface on the street of Berlin and Dresden and Paris and Brooklyn and everywhere. We shake our heads in disbelief. We get scared, really scared. I must confess, I was a bit nervous in the past few weeks. I read so many things in the newspapers about anti-Semitism rising again in Germany, Europe, and in America. And it's happening in the United States, in Montreal, where I live, everywhere. It's not just the old anti-Semitism, which we know. It's also a new kind of anti-Semitism. Today, when you want to say something against the Jews and want to get away with it, if they say something outrageous against Israel. Hatred of Jews is nowadays expressed by bashing Israel. As somebody who was born in Auschwitz, who lost her father and many other family members there, forgive me. I don't remain silent when such awful things against Israel are being said. Of course, you can criticize certain things about Israel or about Canada, where I live, or any other country. Even Jews are criticizing Israel. It happens all the time, believe me. But so many statements about Israel do really cross a line that must never be crossed. Israel doesn't commit mass murder. Assad in neighboring Syria does. Israel doesn't incite children to throw rockets at the kindergartens. Hamas and the Gaza does. Israel is not in danger to the world peace. Iran is. People are silent when thousands are killed in Africa or Asia. But as long as they can blame Israel and the Jews for everything that's bad in that world, they feel righteous, or self-righteous, I should say. Israel was built by survivors of the Holocaust, but by people who went through the worst that can happen to any human being, and who were incredibly lucky to survive. We survivors are so proud what Israel is today. Most Jews around the world are very proud of Israel. We can try to be fair. We can try to be open-minded and not full of prejudice. And that's what I want to ask you a favor. Always try to be fair. Remain open-minded, remain curious, make up your own mind. Don't put people in boxes based on their religion or their appearance. President Rivlin last Sunday came up with fight against bullying. He said it won't be easy, but bullying is hatred. And this is what we have to fight against. I am heartened when I see people taking the streets to defend Jews, to show solidarity. It has happened here, it has happened in Paris, it happened in New York in recent weeks, it happened in Italy, and it's important that these marches happen. We need to preserve this about Auschwitz, we need to preserve that awful place. And we have to put our kids. We have to take them with the March of the Living to show Auschwitz, to show the other concentration camps, and they can see with their own eyes. We hear we finish the tour and they tell us, it changed my life. Do you know how many letters we get? And they say, I am a different person. I want to do something good. We survivors are old people now. I am the youngest. So it's your job to ensure it doesn't happen again. I trust you, you will do the right thing. I hope you will prove me wrong, and I beg you, prove me wrong. The Holocaust will never happen again. Any questions? I want to tell you something here. I can tell you here, before Auschwitz, I went to Germany. I was telling that speech about Israel and this last part in Berlin. And you should see, I can show you the audiences. There was police cadets, there was the army people, and I am standing in Germany 2020 and praising Israel. The feeling, I cannot tell you. It was worse for everything.
We will now open this part of the evening program to a 10-minute question and answer session. If anybody wants to ask a question, we've got Mara and Stephen walking around with microphones, and please come forward and ask Angie or stand up, whatever.
I'm sure you have questions.
Okay, here's...
Hi, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate your making the trip. I found it fascinating that your grandmother survived the war in Budapest. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
You must watch the CTV, because that's when I was talking about it. What happened is, yes, she survived as she was hiding at the printing company with a friend's help. And my aunt, she was by Paul Wallenberg, saved her life. So when my grandmother survived the Holocaust, in 1948, Jews were leaving Hungary. There was no hope to build a life there. And when they left, her friends, they left a box for her. And they said, when we over the border, we're going to send for that box. Grandmother took the box and put it away. And there was a password. So when they come for the box, they will say that password. So a man came and said the password. My grandmother went. She brought the box out, and she opened the sealed box. And it was Napoleon gold in it, which was prohibited value in Hungary. The man opened his coat and showed he's the secret police. They took her, and it was a camp in Hungary, run by Hungarians, and only once we got visiting with my mother. I was a very, very young child, and they told my mother it's only one by one we can go. So she was saying, this is a 4 years old, 5 years old kid. Then go home, they told her. Even she goes by herself, or you're not going in. So my mother went I went front of my mother, and that's how we went in. And she got a visiting rights, like there was no window between my grandmother and us, and we had 20 minutes to talk to each other. And she bent out at the window to lift me up, and then from then, you know, she got hit, and she dropped me, and that was the last time I saw my grandmother. She survived the Holocaust, but not the Hungarians.
Your talk was extremely fascinating and very, very interesting. I could really understand it because I've read the books I'm a Survivor and The Tattooist of Auschwitz, and I could see what your talk brought in those books as well. My question is, the Holocaust happened. The Holocaust really did happen. What do you say to people who say it didn't happen? When Germany says it did happen, the proof is there in the pictures, the people like yourself, but still people say it didn't happen and they deny it. What do you say to that?
I showed the picture of my mother's number. My mother's number. I show my passport. I was born in Auschwitz. But you're right, it's very difficult. But it was an interesting thing with Germany. I never wanted to go to Germany. I never wanted to speak a German. I never wanted to see in life a German. But I ended up in Germany at the trial of Oskar Grönig. How did I end up there? Because when in the 70s we were in Auschwitz, a German lawyer came and asked me to testify. I said I didn't want to talk to him. He was a German in my eyes. I didn't want to see him. So he said, okay, just give me a permission. I can represent you. So my daughter was with me, said, Ma, just give your permission. Let him represent you. So the trial started by Oskar Grönig. And then I hear one of the survivors who finished her testimony went to Oskar Grönig and she said, I forgive you, and hugged Oskar Grönig, the Nazi, and said, I forgive you. Then I felt sick. So I took out the phone and I said, I'm coming for the trial and I testify. So I ended up in Germany like that way. And yes, I did testify. And then I was invited to Dresden. And Dresden was a conference for 200 psychiatrists. And the thing was like trauma transferred from mother to child. So I said, why are you inviting me? I don't have any trauma. So, you know, they said, just think about it. So when you don't know something, you go to your children, right? So I went to my son, who was 30-something, and I said, do you think I have trauma? He said, Ma, you never went even, for a psychologist. You want to go for 250 psychiatrists? So I said, really, do I have any trauma? No, Ma, you survived us, we survived you. End of the story. Good. Then I went to my daughter, and what I say is she gave a list to here to China and back. And she said her whole life was the Holocaust. And what you did to us, we have the trauma. I said, okay, so you go and you speak to them. I don't have trauma, I feel normal. So we ended up, she is going to do the speech. And meantime came the second Nazi trial. So they asked me to testify again. So I told my daughter, come with me. It's just 2 days was difference with the psychiatrist and the Nazi trial. She said, Ma, I am a mother of 4 kids. I have a job. I don't have the time, to run around with you in Europe. Pick one. You want the psychiatrist or you want the Nazi trial? Pick one. So I said, you know what, I want the Nazi trial. That's more difficult than speak to the psychiatrist. So we did the trial, and I went to the psychiatrist. And if you believe it or not, the psychiatrists were standing up and they were crying. You can check it on YouTube. You see them, how they're crying. And then I didn't know that conference was at the university. And we went to see, Dresden, the museum, and youngsters came to me crying, and they were saying, you know, I can't help it. I didn't know my grandfather was a Nazi. He never talked about it. I am so sorry. I apologize. And I got that much letters, and the people were stopping on the street and so sorry. And even second generation looked to me, said, my father was a Nazi and I didn't know, and my mother was at the concentration camp. Whose side should I be? That was the point when I decided I am not angry at the Germans. I'm angry at the Nazis. And there is a difference. And when I was now in Berlin, I tell you, I was a little bit scared because they told me neo-Nazis will be outside protesting. I said, okay, let them in. I am not afraid of them, but I didn't take my daughter with me because for that I was afraid. So it's a difference in Germany. There is a group which is really embarrassed and they don't know how to apologize. But at the same times, there was a mayor there from east part, Thuringia, and she said they had horrendous problems there. They kill people, not the Jews or Muslims, but it's 6 murder was just in that month. That month was January. So Germany has problems. Any other questions? Okay, you can go to Jose.
Oh, wait, we got one more.
Yeah?
As a young teen, I'm really passionate about making sure that this sort of stuff is taught, and I don't see it being taught properly except for a few select people who are very making an effort. So as a survivor, how do you want to see things being taught, and how do you think people should be going about telling your story?
Well, we're very much fighting for government help. The government must help us to create a curriculum, and they're working on it constantly, and try from very early age. And because it is gap, what I was talking to you, the first 20 years they didn't talk about it. The next 20 years nobody wanted to hear about. This is a gap, and this is we're not just the kids we have to educate the adults also. So yes, we go to the Holocaust Museum in Montreal, and the kids, they come there, and they go through the museum, and always one Holocaust survivor are talking to them and telling the story. You should see them. They just, can I touch you? Can I just have a picture with you? And they go home, and they tell at home, oh, you know, the Holocaust really happened. There was a Holocaust survivors who said that and that and that he went through or she went through. So this is one. And then they're working on it because unfortunately we're getting old. But they're doing this very interesting films, like you can ask questions from the Holocaust survivors even if we are not alive anymore. And they did that, like they pre-recorded so many things so that every question should be answered. And then that's what we're asking the government, help us. If it comes from the government, if the government will be strong and combat anti-Semitism and racism, then it's a different story. So, or you have to fight for that, to protest and they ask, for help. Send your children to the March of the Livings. Let the children see, what was this, the concentration camp. Okay?
Are there any other questions?
I don't think so.
One right there.
Oh. You have better eyes.
Thank you for coming, but you talked about the anti-Semitism in Germany. In Berlin, there's a Holocaust museum, Were you there?
Yes.
Because it reminded me very much of the one in Washington.
I was there, you know, I was at the Holocaust Memorial. It's very interesting in Berlin. The Holocaust Memorial is many, many different.
There we go. Try again.
Okay. And I was with an Israeli journalist, and she explained me that memorial. So some of them, these blocks, are built in the sidewalk. You walk on it. Some of them are huge, and some of them are smaller. So she explained to me, in the beginning, we walked on it. We didn't notice it happening. Then it got bigger and bigger, and then it became like a puzzle, and you just can't get out of it. You know, you are in it. And that's the Holocaust. That was the Holocaust. Beside that is the German government. So they said these monuments are not for the Jews. It's horrible big. And it was for the public to see what was the Holocaust. And for beside is the government to remind them every day to see it, all the windows, looking at this monument, and to remind them what happened. I find it very interesting.
Are there any other questions?
I just wanted to prove like they're trying to do something about it. Not enough, but something.
Okay, I'm just going to.
Sorry?
There are still some Jews living in Berlin.
Yes, you know, they came. Yes, they do. They have Jewish schools, and they're so religious, those schools. Like at this, where I was speaking, there was an opera singer also. And because, you know, the very, very religious boys, they're not allowed to hear a woman singing, the boy students were not allowed to come. So there is schools, there is religious schools there. And they're trying to have a Jewish life.
One more.
Oh, I don't know what something you were saying. Oh.
My question's a little bit more lighthearted, I guess, but there's lots of new Netflix shows that are based on the Holocaust or loosely based on the Holocaust, movies that come out like Jojo Rabbit, very popular. And I was just wondering if you think that's a positive because maybe it's educating people that had no idea about events of the Holocaust, or is it a negative because it's misinforming in some cases and over-exaggerating?
Maybe I am too old, maybe I am too hurt, but I did not. I started the Rabbit, Jojo Rabbit. I couldn't watch it. I just cried. I said, maybe I am not intelligent enough, maybe something wrong with me, but I just didn't find it entertaining, and I felt very sorry. It was such a success. The other films about the documentaries are perfect. You know, that I would suggest. But this entertaining, no.
Paulette, this is my aunt.
Yeah. He's coming.
We just watched The Hunters on Prime, and I don't imagine that you have seen it yet, but it was there was portrayal of like that. There was portrayal of Auschwitz, and but it was almost like a dark comedy. Anyways, I would like to hear what anybody else has to say about it because, yeah. Okay.
I heard about it, but I don't have Amazon account, and I was begging for my kids, and who has Amazon? A little bit log on, but nobody had, and I really don't have too much time either.
Oh, so one more? One more?
More of a comment than a question. I was in New York at the Jewish Heritage Museum, and they have a completely multimedia, immersive documentary, comprehensive on Auschwitz. I don't know if you've seen that or not.
I wasn't there personally, but I knew about
Amazing.
it. Yes.
And I would recommend that if anybody gets to New York, they're holding it over until August. It's really a phenomenal experience, just amazing. So that's just not a question.
Hi, I'll just offer a few concluding remarks. My name is Jessica Kogan, and I am the Israel and Overseas Chair at the Jewish Federation of Winnipeg. On behalf of the Federation and March of the Living, I would like to thank everyone for attending tonight's event. Since 1988, March of the Living has provided the opportunity for Jewish high school students to travel to Poland and Israel, learning the lessons of the Holocaust, fulfilling the sacred duty of bearing witness, and vowing never again. In Poland, the march takes place on Holocaust Remembrance Day, where approximately 12,000 students from around the world march the 3-kilometer distance separating Auschwitz and from Birkenau, the same route Jewish prisoners were forced to march to their deaths. It is a highly emotional and meaningful moment as thousands upon thousands of Jewish youth, all wearing our blue jackets, not only remember the Nazi death marches, but perform a defiant March of the Living along that same route. When I marched in 1988, the very first time it was ever done, not only was it a moment of remembering, it was a moment of showing the world that the Nazis did not succeed in their final solution. It was one of the proudest moments of my life, and 32 years later, it has shaped who I am today. The March of the Living is an experience for our the March of the Living experience for our students ends, of course, in Israel, where participants celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut with people from all over the world. Being in Israel after the camps instills hope after the terror, pride in a country that has built itself after the ashes, and drives home the importance of a Jewish homeland for us all. Now, tonight's event was almost 2 years in the making. You see, those of us who work on the March of the Living program, be they staff or volunteers, care so very deeply about the program and the students who make their participation in the program a personal priority. I would like to offer just a few thank yous. First and foremost to Shaarey Zedek Synagogue for partnering with us this evening. We always appreciate working with you. I also want to thank our incredible, we are so lucky to have her, chair of our March of the Living Committee, Carrie Shankro. Our staff, Roberta Mallam, the Coast to Coast Director, Mara Pelletieri, who will be going as a chaperone this year, and of course, our Executive Director of Federation, who always has time to see me when I've got a bee in my bonnet, Elaine Goldstein, for making the March of the Living program in Winnipeg so successful through our shared passion for it. There have been many challenges for the program, but one of the biggest challenges we face is the cost. Our committee worked extremely hard as we set up a goal. We set a goal of sending 20 Winnipeg Jewish students on this year's march. #20 for 2020. Well, not only did we meet our goal, but we surpassed it. And I am happy and extremely proud to say we are sending 24 students on this year's trip in April. Carrie worked very hard at raising funds to reduce the cost of the trip for each student in order to make it accessible for everyone. I want to take this opportunity to thank the many donors who took our phone calls, made their pledges, came and attended our Maj for the March event, made anonymous donations, or met with us personally. Quite simply, we wouldn't be sending 24 of our young leaders without you. My final thank you of the night, of course, is to Angie. Carrie returned from the march 2 years ago, and since that time has told anybody who would listen that Winnipeg needs to hear Angie. So not only did Angie agree to come to Winnipeg for the very first time, but she agreed to spend this entire upcoming weekend educating our 24 March of the Living students at their Shabbaton. Angie, every time you teach our kids, every time you speak to our communities, and every time you yourself participate in the march, you help us all to fulfill our responsibility to remember. Thank you for investing your time and energy in our community. As Carrie said, you truly are a gift.
Thank you so
And
much.
speaking of a gift,
I think
a little token of our appreciation. So once again, wait, I want one of those. So once again, I'm sorry, okay. Okay, so once again, on behalf of the Jewish Federation, March of the Living program, all of us who work on it, we want to thank every single one of you for attending this evening, and we truly appreciate your support. Thank you and good night.